The cigarette smoke chokes me, but I don't let myself cough. Instead, I keep it inside. Everything in me wants to let it out, expel it like some kind of poison disagrees with my organs. Still, I keep it inside. It's my first cigarette ever, in a classroom far away from the populated part of the school. I won't let myself look like a wimp, not in front of her. I couldn't give a crap about the popular kids standing with us in the room. I've never felt the need to care about them. However, when I heard the girl of my dreams was going with them, I just had to be there. That's pretty much how I found myself here. No one goes here anymore. Not after that kid died. Honestly, it was kinda sad. Some poor little girl gets lost and ventures into a neglected and dangerous part of the school on her own, on her very first day at that, and has a large table fall on her and injure her pretty badly. Then, slowly, she loses her life as she bleeds out. You'd expect there to be an outcry of some sort, yet the school pushes the blame onto the parents and bashes them. The local paper joins in, and before you know it, the whole town is bullying this family about not teaching their child proper safety rules. A 7-year-old girl was supposed to be taught proper safety rules. It sounds as ridiculous as it actually is. What do we get from all this? We get lectures on how we, as students, should keep the younger students safe. We get ghost stories that quickly spread across the school about the young girl and how she can still be heard crying. We get a special assembly today on the 1-year anniversary of her death, an assembly where we have a moment of silence for her. But don't worry, guys, refreshments are provided. Seems like everyone around here is an insensitive bastard. I pause my thought to find Alicia looking at me. I take another deep pull off the cigarette I'm holding. I take it better this time. I still feel the need to cough, but not as intense as before. Is this what romance is worth? Because as my brain gets cloudy and I drown in nicotine, it seems worth it. That is when the crying starts. I almost didn't hear it at first. It was soft, but definitely audible. I turn around, but there's nothing. We all start looking around. Have we been caught? None of our teachers would make that soft a sound if they caught us. Must be a small animal. Then it dawns on us all at once, and a nervous chuckle takes over the room. It can't be the stories about the dead girl. It just can't. It's probably just someone playing a prank on us. Still, the whole group slowly but surely creeps towards the door. No one admitting they're scared, but everyone ready to run at the same time. I take another pull off the cigarette, then I hear another cry. It's time for us to go. However, a thud behind us makes us turn around, and then a slam behind us makes us turn around again. Something distracts us, something in the dark of the room, just long enough for us to turn away from the door, long enough for it to slam shut. We're all trapped now. Everyone's scrambling, trying to open the door. The cool kids are still nervously chuckling, thinking it must just be the wind. However, the wind can't close a door hard enough for it to feel like it's been welded to the door frame. We can't get out of the room. That's becoming clearer now. You see, the thing about the light and the dark is that you can see in either one. The other just has to be absent. As the door blocks out the light from outside, the room inside becomes clearer. The dark corner is now taking shape. There's a desk there, a large, heavy one, and underneath it is a small frame. It looks like a doll, but it's faintly moving. It has to be a child. I'm not an idiot, not by any means. I'm a skeptic, definitely, but not an idiot. I'm seeing a ghost live out its last moments, a child live out her last moments. The cigarette is on the floor now, and so am I. We've all fallen to the floor, unable to move. I look around me, and it seems like we've been pinned by an invisible force. It sounds ridiculous, but it makes sense. A force more powerful than our meek bodies can handle. She's not living her last moments. We're living her last moments. I feel like I'm about to die. I'm not ready for this. I'm too young. I just want to go home to see my family. I just want to go back to class. I was so excited to see my friends today, to be around people who I care about. All things that she must have thought about. All things I'm thinking about now. I turn my head, and she's in the corner, sobbing, a child with nowhere to go, and no one to help her. Yet she keeps asking for help. I can't die here. I hope she gets help. I hope I get help. That's when I realize she never got help. And maybe neither will I. We're all going to die here, and I'm terrified by that thought. But I'm not the one I should be afraid for. My life, as scared as I am, doesn't matter. I should be helping the one that looks at me and sees me as someone older, someone who could have helped her. I turn to her and look in her eyes, into the eyes of the dying child, and speak to her. It's going to be okay, I say to her. It's all I can say with the weight on my chest. It's all I need to say. She stops sobbing and looks at me, almost as if she trusts me. I wish I could help, but I can't. The weight is now off my chest. Every one of us is able to get up. Every one of us is able to leave. And so is she. She disappears. I hope that it knows that wherever it's going to be okay. Outside the school, emergency services are waiting. Apparently, the same thing happened to every single person in school. They didn't see the ghost, but they did feel pinned down. Authorities are blaming it on a gas leak from years of neglect by the people in charge. When I hear that, I start to chuckle. I wonder who they're going to pin the blame on this time. The leaves crunched as I walked along the vast, beautiful forest. The blinding sun shone ever so brightly in the sky, setting ever so slowly over the horizon. A breezy wind blew through the forest, singing a quiet song in my ears as I continued to walk. I could hear the sound of animals scurrying through the forest, giving life to the terrain that Mother Nature ever so graciously built. As I navigated my way through the forest, I looked around at all the shady trees as I jumped over all the logs that lay on the ground. I imagined the life each tree had had, how many people throughout history had walked the same path I was. Each tree was a story to be told, each as old as nature itself. I was a big thinker as a kid, always asking my parents questions about how the world worked. I was always in my head, wandering around the worlds that I created. Worlds of cities built with bright diamonds, fantasy lands where I was the hero of my own tale. Nature was my escape from everything. I would imagine myself fighting the ferocious beast that I had created in my head, or that I was on an adventure to Mordor with Frodo. This time, I imagined I was walking on the death trail, in search of an ancient treasure buried by Blackbeard himself. I fought devilish beasts whose teeth could destroy a whole tree with a single bite, a dragon whose eyes shined with crimson, and breathed fire as hot as the sun. The forest was my favorite place to think, for this inviting evergreen forest was beautiful in every way. The sound of squirrels chattering could be heard as the birds sang their final song, for the sun was setting slowly on the horizon. Bright, vibrant colors filled the sky. The forest sparkled as sunlight crackled across the trees, lighting up the dirt path ahead of me, decorated with roots and flowers of many kinds. It was lively. The sound of scurrying could be heard on every side. The leaves and twigs crunched under my feet, and the branches hung as if they were welcoming me. I breathed gracefully, my body feeling a slight chill as I walked through the path. I was deep inside my imagination when the sound of water took me out of my thoughts. I always hated that sound. It meant that soon I'd have to turn back. I continued my way, trying to ignore the sound, but it was becoming increasingly harder as I reached the river. I slowed my pace, trying to prolong my journey back home. It wasn't long, though, until I saw the sparkling blue river, the sound of crashing water filling my ears as I reached my endpoint. I stopped and cleaned off my arms and hands from the dirt that always found its way onto my body. I felt the water flow through my hands as I looked through the water in the tree line. I would always turn back at the river, for my fear of drowning kept me at bay. I would sometimes walk along that river, dipping my hands into the water as I walked. Something in me didn't feel fear of the water that day, though. I felt adventurous. I contemplated as I looked beyond the river stream. There was a whole other part of the forest beyond it, new lands to be discovered. I looked up at the sky. The sun was almost over the horizon. I thought about being out here at night, thoughts of monsters and creatures capturing me. I remembered my stories, though, the hero who saved the world from danger. Suddenly, without a second thought, it was like my body just got up and began to jump on the rocks in the river. I felt the water on my feet as I stopped on each of the rocks before jumping to the next. Once I reached the other side, I quickly ran into the forest beyond. I walked along as I studied the trees to get a good idea of my surroundings to find my way back. I made landmarks on trees out of chalk and always carry some with me so I wouldn't get lost, something I always do when traveling new terrain. Something about this area felt off, though. It was as if Mother Nature had left, leaving her creations in ruin. It was a lot darker than I thought it would be. There were so many trees that it blocked out the sun. I was a fearless kid, though. I thought that I couldn't be harmed, for nature was my dearest friend. I was wrong, though, for no one is safe from the brutality of Mother Nature. Not even me. As I walked through the forest, I looked ahead to get a good map of the terrain in my head. Shadows gathered around the forest as the dark trees hung over me like limbs from an ancient world. There was an ominous silence that filled the woods. No sounds of animals running around, no crickets or frogs chirping, no wind twirling in my ears, just pure and utter silence. The only thing I could hear was the sound of leaves crunching underfoot as I walked. I noticed a tree that looked like a hideous witch, its gnarled limbs and black claws stretching over me, almost serving as a warning not to go any further. This was a tree that had died many years ago from the look of it, succumbing to nature's life cycle. I stared at it for a few minutes, feeling an uneasiness that crawled at the back of my throat. I continued my journey across the uncharted forest, but the tree stayed embedded in my mind. There was a feeling of dread that I fought off as my heart felt uneasy. The forest seemed dead, as if it was abandoned long ago. Stumps were scattered across the forest grounds. The clumps of bushes lay among the stumps. Twigs snapped from my feet. The brown trees were so close to each other, forming a thick canopy. It was barely bright enough for me to see ahead, yet I did not stop. There was a mixture of feelings that I felt I couldn't describe. One thing was for sure, though. It felt as if I was being watched. It was like the trees had eyes of their own and were watching me very closely. My senses widened, my skin tingling. I breathed deeply and listened with great intensity. My instincts were telling me that something was off, a deep feeling that crept over me like a beast. I kept looking behind me to make sure nothing was following me, scanning my surroundings with great efficiency. That's when something caught my eye. Straight ahead, deep in the forest, barely in eyesight, stood a tall, dark figure that peered at me from behind a tree. I was paralyzed in shock, gripped by the sudden strong urge of fear that froze my entire body as I stared at whatever was ahead of me. I couldn't make out any features. It was so dark that I couldn't see the mysterious figure clearly. It felt as though our eyes were locked together, but I couldn't even see its eyes. It felt like it was staring right through my soul. I tried to convince myself it was all in my mind, but everything in me told me otherwise. It just stood there, staring at me. My body couldn't move. I tried to, but my brain had just shut off. As I looked at this creature, everything about it just didn't seem right. Its arms were so long that one of them touched the ground. The other wrapped around the tree. Its head had a weird shape to it, as if it was stretched out. The creature stood incredibly tall. It had to be at least 9 feet. It was skinny, as if it was just pure bones and nothing else. It didn't feel like an animal. It felt like two intelligent beings staring at each other. Somehow it felt even quieter than it had before, silence creeping down my whole body, paralyzing me. Everyone has a fight-or-flight reflex, but in some instances, when a human reaches a new level of fear they've never felt before, they just freeze. You try to move, but it's like you're being gripped by an invisible force, every instinct in you telling you to run, but you just can't. Even though I've fought every monster and beast in my head, when faced with real danger, I didn't fight. All I could feel was fear. Fear of the unknown, the certainty of death. A cold chill filled the air. Even with no wind, it got colder. My body violently shook, legs trembling with pure dread and fear. I felt the thing looking me up and down, as if it were studying me. Neither of us made a single move, as if it too was paralyzed. Sweat dripped down my face. I breathed heavily as a panic attack began to emerge out of the darkening pit of my hell, dragging me down as it threatened to devour me. Suddenly, the creature quickly disappeared behind the tree. The sudden movement caused my brain to snap out of its paralysis, and my legs started moving. It was like my primal instinct kicked in, instincts given to us from our primal ancestors. My mind was racing with thoughts as I wondered what it was I had just seen. I was trying to convince myself that it was just an animal, but everything in me told me that something was not right. I could hear my own heartbeat as it tried to claw its way up my chest. Keep going straight. Soon you should see a large tree that has vines wrapped around it. Once you reach that, turn right, and you should see a tree with white chalk. Keep running towards that until you see the stump that you almost fell over. Make another right and keep going forward, I thought to myself, mapping out the forest in my head. My skills of navigation have never helped me before like this, and I was running and thinking at such a speed that I was hurting both my head and my legs. I started to smell a foul stench, something that smelled like a rotten corpse. It filled the forest, and I nearly gagged once it poured into my nose. A clicking noise surrounded me, fast and animalistic. I started to hear something in the forest running behind me, footsteps sounding heavy and fast. I looked back for a second to see if I could see whatever was chasing me, but all I could see was the dark open forest. I looked back and continued my way towards the river. I weaved my way through the forest quickly, making sharp lefts and rights and turning my way back to safety. My legs felt like they were going to break. My heart was hammering at my chest as my lungs were set ablaze. I listened to the sound of running behind me. The clicking was even closer and louder than before. The smell even stronger and fouler. It, too, knew how to navigate the forest as I did, maybe even better. My skin felt cold as I shook to the point where I almost fell many times, but I always caught myself just in time. Make a sharp right turn once you reach the dead tree. Once you see the rock that stands tall, make a left and keep running straight. It was like my mind was on adrenaline too, thinking at such a pace that I never thought I could before. The running behind me sounded even closer, the stench even stronger. My legs felt as if they were going to break, yet my speed still stayed the same as I used every ounce of energy I had. A familiar sound filled my ears, a sound I've always hated and despised. It was the river. It was close. I ignored the pain I felt in my legs and continued to run as whatever was behind me was catching up. My heart was beating like a war drum. I was running off of pure adrenaline at this point. My chest felt as if someone was squeezing my internal organs together, my feet burning from the many blisters I had. I ignored it all, though, and continued to guide myself through the cruelty of Mother Nature. I began to see the river stream. I was approaching it rapidly. My legs felt numb, my lungs on fire as I breathed heavily out of the exhaustion of fear. It sounded like it was only a few feet behind me. I knew that if I didn't reach the river, then it would catch me soon. The clicking sound was basically right in my ear. The stench was so strong that I gagged. I used every ounce of energy I had to run even quicker, ignoring all the pain I felt in my body. I hurtled out of the forest once I reached the river and jumped my way across the rocks that stuck out, falling onto my knees once I reached the other side. I quickly got back up and began to run again. I didn't stop running until my body collapsed, not being able to move. I hadn't noticed that it had turned to night, a dark umbra surrounding the forest. I was too exhausted to move. Every breath struck my chest deep. Yet there was no sign of anything chasing me or its foul smell that had followed me. The sound of wind and nature filled my ears again, replacing the terrifying clicking noises. Tears began to slowly drip down my face, mixing with my sweat. I opened my mouth to let out a whimper that never came, too exhausted to even make a sound. I wanted to go home, back to where my mother was. I started to breathe even heavier, my heart beating so fast that it was like having a heart attack. Everything became fuzzy and blurry, my mind racing with thoughts that only made me panic worse. I shook rapidly. I felt gripped by a sudden force that squeezed my body tight. My chest pounded in pain. It felt as if everything was being smashed by a hammer. I felt an impending doom dragging me down into deep darkness, deeper than any pit of despair I'd ever known. I tried to catch my breath, but it was just too much for me. I thought that whatever chased me would find me and devour my very soul. Everything was so loud, it felt like I was trapped in a tornado. I felt like I was going to throw up from the dizziness. My muscles were tense. The world was spinning around me as my heart started to pound worse than it ever had before. The pain from my chest slowly spread to my shoulders, giving a sharp pain in both of them. I got chills all over my body, gripped in fear and anxiety that had its hold on me and wouldn't let go. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was going to die a gruesome and horrifying death. I looked at the night sky as if it was in the hands of death and noticed how beautiful it looked. The pale crescent moon shone like a silver claw in the night sky. I looked upon the vast sea of stars, shining so brightly like little diamonds in the sky. Everything slowly went quiet. It was like the earth stopped. I felt the summer green grass on my hands and looked at the trees that surrounded me. Fireflies filled the darkness, sparkling like precious valuable stars in that dark place. The sound of crickets could be heard all around, chirping their song in replacement of the birds singing. My heart slowly started beating in a steady rhythm, and my breath slowed to a smooth pace. I breathed in a smell that was a woodsy fragrance, letting go of all my worries. It was as if Mother Nature cradled me in her arms, reassuring me that everything was all right. I felt a moment of tranquility, my mind silenced. I lay on the earth, admiring the beauty of the world around me. I slowly stood up, ignoring the pain I felt in my legs and chest. I welcomed back the blossoming, fragrant forest as I walked slowly through Mother Nature's creation. I began to walk home, admiring every inch of it that surrounded me. I always imagined the beautiful land in my head, landscapes of fantasy filled with bright colors. I never realized that I was already in a dazzling world, filled with so many mysteries to be discovered. The forest was breathtaking tonight, sparkling in the moonlight like little crystals. I wasn't in my head on the walk home. My mind was silent for a change. Brown trees stood tall. The flowers bloomed, engulfing the forest in a smell so lush and fresh. I thanked Mother Nature that night for she taught me a lesson that I'll never forget. I'm not invincible. I'm no hero or great warrior. I'm just a child. Not every story needs a hero, and I don't have to be the hero in every story. I walked my way home, embracing the forest for the first time. I once lived a normal life. I was a groundskeeper at a local cemetery. Wasn't the best job, but hey, paid the bills. I lived alone in an apartment complex that stood about a mile from the cemetery. I would spend my time writing short stories about the boring life and the days at the cemetery. When I worked, it was usually during the afternoon, into the twilight hours. I never would have worked at night. That place is creepy enough as it is, thank you very much. I stayed far away from it during the night. It was always the same routine. Show up at the cemetery, gather my tools, go out and pick up trash and tidy up gravestones till it started to get dark. Then go home and do whatever. Nothing special. The routine continued for a year and a half, ever since the day I got the job. Not once did I ever run into anything spooky, like you'd see in those cheesy horror movies. There was never any black cats or curses, and certainly no zombies crawling out of the ground to eat my brains. However, there was one day that would change my life forever. The day I saw him, or rather it. The day I saw the Slender Man. Started off like any other day. I walked to the cemetery, got my tools, and headed out to pick up trash. But something felt different that day. It was hard to explain, but I felt as though I was being watched. I would constantly look around, nervous, only to find there was nothing there. The only sound I heard were birds chirping in the trees, and the occasional car that passed by. So I spent the entire day on edge, something in the back of my mind telling me that there was something else with me in the cemetery. At the end of my shift, as I headed back to put my tools away for the night, I noticed that the birds were gone. There were no cars passing by anymore. Everything was eerily quiet. Just then, I saw what appeared to be a man standing about 100 feet from me. From what I could see, he was abnormally tall and wore a black suit jacket with a white shirt and a black tie. Because it was beginning to get dark, I couldn't see his face very well, so I couldn't tell if it was someone familiar. I called out to him, but he didn't move. He just stood there, like a statue. I began to walk towards him, accidentally dropping my tools along the way. I bent down to pick them up, and when I looked to where the man was, he was gone. There was no sign of him anywhere. Scratched my head and shook it off, thinking that I was just seeing things because I was overworked. I put my tools away and headed home, but I walked a little quicker than usual. I was still a little nervous, and questions filled my head. Who was that man? Why did he just stand there? How did he disappear so quickly? Was he real or just a figment of my imagination? That night, I barely slept at all. It was my thoughts that caused my insomnia. The next day at the cemetery, I was even more tense. I felt like if a leaf were to fall on my head, I'd scream in terror. Unfortunately for me, the more tense I got, the more distracted I got from my work. Soon enough, Jeff, my boss, came out to talk to me. Jeff's a good guy. He and my father went way back, and he was the one who gave me the job as a groundskeeper in the first place. He and I were also good friends, and he knew that I wasn't acting myself today. "Steven, what's the matter?" he asked me. "You seem a little off today. Is something wrong?" I don't want to sound like a crazy person, but I knew I couldn't lie to Jeff, so I told him the truth. "I saw something yesterday, Jeff. There was a man in a suit that was just standing in the cemetery. He didn't do anything, and then he just disappeared out of nowhere. Kind of freaked me out. Jeff looked at me like I was crazy. Wait, what did you say the man looked like? I was surprised that he actually somewhat believed my story. He was really tall, with a nice suit on. It was too dark, so I couldn't see his face. Jeff rubbed his head and sighed. I don't believe it. I rolled my eyes, thinking that he was talking about my story, but then he continued. I didn't think the legends were true, but what you've explained to me, Stephen, verifies that maybe the Slender Man does exist. Now I was the one who was confused. The Slender Man? What's a Slender Man? I'm not the one you should be asking those questions of, Stephen. I only know a little bit about him, but I have a friend, James. He knows everything there is to know about the Slender Man. He took out a piece of paper and a pen and scribbled something down. This is where he lives, he says, handing it to me. I'll give him a call and tell him what you saw and that you're coming by to learn more about the Slender Man. Any questions you have, he'll answer them. Still thought the idea was a little crazy, but I wanted to know exactly what this Slender Man was. That night, I did as Jeff suggested, paid a visit to his friend James. As I entered his house, I saw that he was already seated at a table, with pictures scattered all around. When I walked through the door, James greeted me with a smile. Ah, Stephen, Jeff told me you were coming. Please, take a seat. I pulled up a chair to the table and began to observe some of the pictures he had laid out. Jeff told me that you think you saw the Slender Man and that you wanted more info on him. Well, you've come to the right place. I nodded, and he began to tell me everything he knew. One thing you should know about the Slender Man is he's not human. We don't know what he is exactly, but we know for sure that he isn't human. People who have seen him describe him just as you saw him, but he's sometimes seen with black tentacles emerging from his back. He's a fearsome creature, and kills most likely for fun. Now, let me give you a little backstory on the Slender Man. One of the first recorded accountings of him was back in the mid-1500s in Germany. A woodcut artist by the name of Hans Frankenberg created a piece that displayed a creature that looks not unlike the Slender Man. It was discovered in Halsberg Castle in 1883. Here's what it looks like. He slid one of the pictures over to me, one that depicted a knight dueling with a strange humanoid creature with multiple arms and legs. James continued. Now, Hans was known for his realistic depictions of human anatomy, but as you can see in his work, the creature on the right has multiple arms and an oddly shaped face. This work differs greatly from all his other works. I was intrigued at the amount of knowledge that James had, but he wasn't quite finished. He slid another picture over to me, this one showing several children as they frolicked in a playground. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for the fact that a man that looked exactly like the one I'd seen in the cemetery was standing ominously in the background. Looking at that picture sent a chill racing down my spine. Now, this here is the first recorded photograph of the Slender Man. You can see him in the background. According to records, every single child in that photograph disappeared shortly after it was taken. They haven't been seen since. I was astonished. Couldn't believe what I was seeing. James then passed me a few more modern-looking pictures. Each one seemed like a normal, everyday nature or family photo. But in the background of them all was the same creature, looming in the shadows. That's pretty much all you need to know, James concluded. Any questions? I shook my head, still trying to wrap my mind around what exactly this thing I had seen the other day was. The Slender Man is a mysterious force, Stephen, James told me. Nobody knows exactly why he does the things he does, whether he does it for sport or if he's a pawn for some higher being. We will likely never know. Coming to this realization, I knew I had to do something. I decided the next day I would find the Slender Man and see for myself what kind of monster he was. I figured he was probably still in the vicinity of the cemetery, so I would hopefully find and capture him. "I wouldn't try that if I were you," James warned. "The Slender Man has powers that you wouldn't believe. It's best to just let nature take its course. Whatever you do, don't try to approach him if you see him." I assured James that I would not try such a thing, and thanked him for the information as I left. However, I was still content on attempting to end the Slender Man's reign of terror, once and for all. Working through the next day like it was any other day, I kept my guard up the whole time, looking for any sign of the Slender Man. There was no sign of him that day, but once my shift was over, I put away my tools, except for my flashlight, and headed over to where I'd seen him standing a couple of days prior. Like that faithful day, everything was eerily quiet. No birds, no cars made any sound. I could sense he was nearby. I approached the area where I'd first seen him and sat on one of the gravestones, waiting. I knew he would come eventually. After about 20 minutes, I began to give up hope until I heard rustling coming from the woods that surrounded the cemetery. It was beginning to get dark, and I got a little nervous. I'd never been in that area when it was that dark before. It was almost pitch black now, and I had only the moon and my flashlight for light. I gathered up some confidence and walked into the woods, my flashlight shining through the darkness. I followed the rustling sound, and it began to get louder and louder. It grew closer and closer, and my heart began to race. Sweat formed on my brow, and my hands shook as I tried to hold the flashlight steady. "Show yourself," I ordered, as loudly as I could. Suddenly, from out of the brush of the woods came a squirrel. I let out a deep sigh of relief as the squirrel just stared at me for a few seconds. Then it took off, running away from me. I thought nothing of it. It was a squirrel, after all. They're usually afraid of their own shadow. I turned around, and it felt like I walked into a brick wall. I fell hard to the ground and dropped my flashlight. I couldn't see much, but I could see the outline of a figure, illuminated by the full moon. I stumbled around like a madman, grabbing for my flashlight. I found it and shone it at the figure. I started at its legs and moved the light up its body. When I hit its torso, I saw that it was wearing a suit and tie. I swear, I felt my heart stop for a moment. I shined the light up at its face and gasped in horror at what I saw. This creature had no face. It looked like an empty canvas. No hair, no face, no nothing. Just a pale white head, looking down at me, as if it knew that I was there. He must have been at least 9 or 10 feet tall. I stumbled to my feet and felt 2 hands grasp my neck. I began to panic as my heart raced faster and faster, my breathing getting heavy. The creature pulled me closer and raised me up so that my head was level with his. I stared into where its face should have been, and he tilted his head as if he were observing me. I could barely breathe as his grasp grew tighter around my neck. I struggled furiously, and suddenly several black tentacles emerged from the creature's back. I knew this was the end. I was about to become another victim of the Slender Man. He raised one of those tentacles, and I braced myself for death. However, I then heard a faint bark, like from a dog, and a few men calling my name. The creature turned his head towards the noise and then back to me. He took the raised tentacle and wrapped it around my forearm. A burning pain shot through my entire arm, and I winced. If that thing's hand hadn't been cutting off my air supply, I would have screamed bloody murder. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. The creature dropped me to the ground and stood over me for a few seconds. I looked up to it, and I swear he nodded to me before fading into the surrounding darkness. I gasped for breath as the men found me. Jeff was with them. "Steve, what the hell were you doing here? I heard you yelling, so we came to find out what was wrong." With what little energy I had left, I let out a whisper, barely audible. It was the Slender Man. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I found myself in a hospital bed. My neck and forearm were still in pain. Once I'd gained complete consciousness, I looked down at my forearm and saw that there was a black mark where the Slender Man had wrapped his tentacle around me. I stared at it for a few minutes, trying to contemplate why he had spared my life and left me with just a black mark. Before I had a chance to think about it, Jeff and James came into the room, Jeff carrying my laptop. "How you feeling, Steve?" Jeff asked. "Still in a lot of pain," I replied. "The doctors say I should be out in a couple of days, maybe even tomorrow." "I warned you not to try to approach him." James shook his head. I figured he'd be a little upset with me. "I know. I really wish I'd listened to you." He put his hand on my shoulder to comfort me. "It's all right. I know how you feel. You wanted to get an up-close and personal view of the Slender Man. Who wouldn't? I'm just surprised he let you live." I was just as surprised. Had it not been for the men calling my name, I probably wouldn't have gotten away so lucky. Soon later, Jeff handed me my laptop. "Why'd you bring this?" I asked. "Because you need to tell your story," he replied. "The story about how you met and survived the Slender Man. I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to hear about it." "But who's to say anybody will believe it?" I asked skeptically. James smiled and put a hand on my shoulder. "Stephen, for every skeptic there's a believer. I'm sure someone out there will believe it. Hell, maybe there's someone who had an experience just like yours. Now get some rest before you start writing. You'll need it." The two started to walk away until I called them over. "Hey guys, why do you think he left me with this?" I showed them the black mark on my arm, and James rubbed his chin. "No idea. I've never heard of anyone reporting a case of that happening. Maybe since you were lucky enough to survive him, he gave it to you as something to remember him by." He smiled, and the two walked out of the room. I chuckled to myself at the thought, but then I realized that maybe that wasn't so crazy of an idea after all. I opened my laptop and began writing this story, my story, the story of my experience with the Slender Man. If I learned anything from that ordeal, it's that we may never know who or what the Slender Man is exactly, or where he's going to show up next. But I give this warning to you, dear readers. Beware the Slender Man, for the Slender Man watches us all. I always wanted to be a writer, ever since I was in second grade. Over the course of my life, I got pretty good at it. Even got to the point where companies were paying me large salaries to take their ideas and turn them into stories and ad campaigns. By the time I was 30, I generated millions of dollars, spun up a portfolio that could land me any job, and made a name for myself in professional writing circles. But there was one thing I was missing: the ability to come up with good ideas. Now, you may think that in my position, that didn't matter much. Companies gave me the ideas, I brought them to life, and I made a lot of money doing it. Why did my lack of ideas really matter? They mattered because money didn't matter to me. Ideas did. I didn't want to be a professional writer. I wanted to be a creative one. I wanted to tell stories that chilled my readers, turned their stomach, broke their hearts. I wanted to create characters that men secretly cried over and women openly lusted over in their book clubs. I wanted to paint settings that kept children up at night and drove movie producers crazy. I wanted to be the best storyteller. The only way to do that was to come up with winning ideas. But I didn't have any, so I looked for them in prompt workbooks. I even stole them from other authors' stories. I went to the workshops and watched as my peers spent their time while I stared at blank papers and laptop screens. Nothing worked. My ideas were either soft and boring or unrealistic and uncompelling. Nothing that I conceived begged to be brought to life on the page, and when I forced them out, they always seemed to droop over as if they were empty bags without skeletons or muscles. They were husks without any of the human stuff that held a real person up. Unlike me, They didn't even have the disappointment or self-pity to stand on their own. I was 35 when my pathetic inability to come up with ideas finally overwhelmed me. I didn't remember exactly what caused it, but I was on my way home from yet another writing workshop with the local Writers Guild when I decided that my life had grown meaningless. I was going home to craft a story, and if I couldn't do it, I was going to take my own life. That, I decided, was at least a creative story that someone would remember. You might suspect that the ultimatum gave me a sense of fear, but for the first time in my life, something clicked. There were stakes, and I felt the strange brush of a story pass over me, gently hitting my cheek with its tail. It was gone before I could grab it, but once again, for the first time, I knew that it would come back. It had responded to the stakes. I sped the rest of the way home, eager and gleeful to see which way the story would unfold. Would the hero pass the test, or would he fall into darkness? I didn't know. I couldn't wait to find out. I nearly knocked down my front door in a rush to get to my desk. I didn't even bother to turn on any lights as I thundered upstairs and down the hall to my bedroom, all the way in the back. I even tripped over my cat, who was so startled by the change in my normally lethargic state that he was caught in a panic trying to figure out which way to run. Once I was in my bedroom, I lit a candle, opened my laptop, and felt all the momentum drain from the tip of my fingers. What was I going to write about? I hadn't had a single idea on my way home, but I'd felt them swimming around. They'd called out to me again and again, "Come to me, take me, expose me to the world." For the first time, they wanted me, but they were teasing little things, and now that it was time to get to business, they were hiding. It didn't bother me, though. I'd heard the whole spiel before. You had to start writing, and the story would come. So that's what I did, and they did start to come. I could feel them again, little threads brushing my cheeks, my arms, my hands, but I couldn't see them. They kept hiding just beyond the veil of reality. I could almost hear them laughing at me like little sprites, making childish bets among themselves about how long I would keep trying until I gave up for the last time. Well, I wasn't going to give up, I decided with a huff, but suddenly the stakes didn't feel so thrilling anymore. Instead, the reality of what I'd promised inflated in front of me, and I realized that I was going to tell a story one way or another, and I didn't want to tell the story I'd leveraged as collateral. But I didn't have a different story to tell, and I wasn't sure how long it would take me to make one, if I was even capable. But that didn't really matter, did it? This was going to end, one of two ways. I drummed my fingers on the desk for a while. Then I typed in random keys until I had a page full of J3R, 3R, 9S, and other random characters. But that didn't turn into a story, so I opted for a classic, Once Upon a Time. What came after that? I wasn't sure. I kept fidgeting with different things on my desk until my candle started to sputter, and I looked up to find that the wick was drowning in melted wax. I'd been sitting here wrestling with my ideas for hours, and all I had was a page full of random letters and numbers. I put my hands on my knees, preparing to stand up. Then I remembered my ultimatum. I wasn't ready for that yet. I'd felt the idea swimming by just hours earlier in the car. This was my chance to pin them down, and I wasn't about to get up, no matter how bored or hungry or thirsty or hopeless I felt. Plus, I didn't particularly want to die. I'd just said it because it felt story-like, and I hoped it would kickstart my creativity. With that in mind, I settled back down and tried to start my first sentence. I wrote, deleted, wrote again until I lost count. Finally, I had a first sentence when my eyes were starting to seriously droop, and the yawn became more and more frequent. I looked at my watch. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, far past my bedtime, but I was starting to feel it again, the wisp of a story thread brushing my cheek. I had a first sentence, and it was time to get to work. I kept writing. The progress was faster than ever before. By 4 a.m., I had 2 pages. By 5, I had half of another. But by 5:15, I was starting to slow down. My head was bobbing back and forth, and every few minutes I would wake up, surprised that I'd fallen asleep. I tried my best to look at the screen, but it was blurry. So blurry that I couldn't even read the words. It was time to go to sleep. I stood up and my legs gave out, sending me elbow first onto my desk. But I didn't feel it. The only thing I felt was joy. I'd done it. I had an idea. By this time, I didn't even know what it was about anymore, but I had an idea. I stumbled back down the hallway to the kitchen to get a glass of water. My cat protested loudly. He might have been hungry, but I couldn't really tell. I'd kept my door closed the entire time I'd been writing, so I hadn't seen him much. In the kitchen, I filled a glass of water and was halfway through gulping it down when I froze, letting the rest dump down my chest. "Peekaboo," slithered a dark, playful voice from the shape that had frozen mid-gulp. "Giving up so soon, are you?" I stared back at the two shining eyes, the only indication that something had been sitting on the couch in the first place. The shape stood and walked towards me, with a slow, deliberate pace. The next great American author, standing in his kitchen, a brilliant book sitting on his screen, just waiting to be finished, but he's ready to call it quits. By now, the figure was on the edge of the shadowed, carpeted square that made up my living room. He took another step, exposing a long, thin, suited leg. "Ah, it's 'cause you don't remember me, do you?" With that, the figure stepped out into the slat of gray morning light, making its way into the kitchen by the window. I stumbled backwards at the sight, but there wasn't far to go. My back was already against the sink. The thing that stepped out was no man, though that was the closest description anyone would have given. It was tall and skinny, almost to a sickly point. It wore a suit that was at least one size too big, so that the shoulders were too wide, the jacket too baggy, the sleeves too long, and the pants fell in rolls of fabric at his shoes. The only thing remotely normal about it was its face, which had the uncanny look of someone who could only be human, but on the very verge of being called so. It had a sharply contrasted jawline, huge cheekbones, overly tight lips, and sharp, bright eyes. Besides the thin, stringy hair that fell over its shoulders in unkempt, flat locks, the smile was the most memorable feature. It was a smart smile, devious and genuinely malicious, the kind of smile you'd see before someone completely innocent gets unfixedly hurt. "How are you gonna do it, Nathan? I've been sitting on the couch, brimming with ideas." "Oh, I'm sorry. Was that insensitive? What I mean is that you have options. You're clearly ready to exercise them, since you're in here. Come, sit down with me and we'll talk them out. I'm thinking grand." It gestured with a long, outstretched arm, motioning as if it wanted to put its arms around me and guide me like a friend. "Remember, this is your story moment." By this point, I had already backed myself onto the corner without realizing it, and now I must have looked like I was trying to pack myself into one of the cabinets. "Nathan," it started again, taking another step forward. Forgive me. My manners astound me sometimes. I didn't introduce myself." It bit its bottom lip and flashed its same grin. "My name is Promise." I leapt back down from the counter and sprinted down the hallway, where I threw the door closed and jumped onto my bed. Promise's chuckle echoed down the hallway. "I guess you're gonna keep working on that story, huh?" it called after me. I was nearly hyperventilating when I sat down at my desk again, but at least my eyes weren't blurry anymore. My mind and body were wide awake, although I wasn't entirely sure what had just happened was real. But what else could it have been? I asked myself sharply. Something was in my house. Something had been sitting on my couch, mocking me. Something that wasn't entirely human had just introduced itself to me. And it knew about my ultimatum, my promise. I breathed out, putting my face in my palms. It knew about my promise. I sat there with my head in my hands for a few minutes before I calmed down enough to think. I had two options: finish my story or run. I wasn't sure that running would help, so I slid off the bed and walked back over to my desk. I scrolled back up to the top of the page and started to read so I could get back on track. As soon as I started, a guttering emptiness spread from my stomach to my throat. The story that I'd been working on for nearly 12 hours was awful. The core idea, exploring the daily life of a man who's haunted by his childhood emotional neglect, was boring. The entire 3 pages were nothing but me spinning my wheels, writing about a man whose life was so dull that no one would want to read him anyway. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt the breathless weight of fear. Promise was waiting. Promise was eager for me to come out again, because he must know. He must know that my story was flat. He must know that my character was lifeless. He must know that I had no story kernel or any other idea that the other writers were always seeming to have. He could probably read my story right now, I thought with wild certainty. And it was no longer curiosity or creativity that drove me to my keyboard. Instead, it was wild desperation. In one move, I selected all the text and deleted it. When I tried to settle in, my breath was too heavy, and I could feel it. I knew he was there. Whether he was sitting on the couch or leaning against the door, I knew he was there. All I knew was he could hear the click-clack of the keys and the bang-bang of my heart. I was sure he could even hear my thoughts, and so I screamed as loud as I could in my head, "Not done, not done, not done," until my inner ear felt like it was bleeding and blunted. And then I was exhausted again. No energy, no ideas, just an ever-dulling knowledge that I had to finish this story. That's when I saw them. I looked down at the clock in the corner of my screen to check the time before getting back to work. It was 7:42. Morning sunlight was dancing through my window, and it caught something and sent a dazzling rainbow all around the room. It was gone in a moment, but I turned all around to look for it, and found it circling my head in wispy motions. A translucent butterfly with long threads hanging at the ends of its wings. As it flew around my head, the threads tickled my cheek, and I gasped. For the first time all night, it was my turn to smile. I'd made it through the night and been rewarded. An idea had graced me, a sacred muse in the form of a butterfly. My smile grew, and suddenly there were more flashes of light, more and more swimming in the air, catching the sunlight and sending dazzling refracted rainbows of light all around the room, directly into my eyes. So this was what it was like. So many of them at once, at least 50 ideas kissing my head with their threads. I'd waited my entire life. I'd prayed for this, sacrificed for this, but clearly I'd never sacrificed enough. Whoever had been listening had needed more to send me a muse, and my life and the balance had been enough. I was ready, so I reached out and cupped my hand around the random butterfly, breathing deeply of its golden light, ready for ideas to flow through my nostrils and into my soul. But the moment I touched it, the butterfly disappeared as if it had never been. I sat back, shocked, then I inched my hands towards each other, ready to cup it and breathe it in, but it also disappeared as if it had never existed. I tried a third, and then, getting desperate, I tried to pluck a fourth out of the air. Both disappeared as soon as I touched them. Hot, heavy rage rose in my stomach. I plucked at another, and it was gone. I swung my head forward and tried to breathe in the group, but all I met was empty air. I slammed my hands together over a solitary tenth and opened them to find nothing but stinging red skin. Every time they disappeared in front of me, the butterflies would appear again in my peripheral vision, and they would multiply. Eventually, it became more detrimental to try to catch them, and I dropped into my chair and looked at my screen. By then, I could barely look at it for all the bright butterflies circling my head, but I had to. I hadn't forgotten who was out there, waiting in the shadows of the curtains I'd left drawn over the windows. I went on working like this for another 12 hours. I had to squint at my screen just to see, and I wrote and deleted more times than I could count. Eventually I started drifting off, and by 12 p.m. my eyes were screaming for a break, my bladder crying for relief, and my parched throat felt like it cracked with every breath. But I couldn't step outside the room until it was done. So I stood up and danced with the butterflies. I couldn't touch them, but at least dancing would show them I cared. I stumbled back and forth across the floor, falling into the vase I kept by my desk and sending it shattering to the carpet. I had an incredible deep shattering noise as pieces of porcelain rocketed across the room. My eyes must have grown as wide as the windows. At least that's how they felt to me, because it was perfect. It was perfect for my story. I rushed through the broken mess back to my desk and slammed myself into the seat. I pressed enter on the keyboard and started typing my next line. I wasn't exactly sure what the story was about, but I was certain this was the one. I opened my eyes and the butterflies were gone. I sat up straight, drawing in breath sharply as I looked at the clock. 12:07. I'd accidentally slept for 7 minutes. Incensed, I balled up my fists and hit myself in the head. Stupid. I had work to do. I had to stay awake. If I went for long enough without working, he would... I saw his eyes looking in through the cracked door and watched as his emotionless face erupted in a grin. "Quitting time?" he asked, poking a finger through the door. I pushed myself out of the side of my chair and fell tailbone first on the floor. "Don't worry, Nathan. I'm just checking on you. I heard that awful crash, and then there was silence. I was beginning to think something might have happened to you. I couldn't let that happen. That's my job. But you have to make the call. Though, guessing by how long you've been in here at this, I don't think there's much time left. Maybe I should wait close by." He pushed the door the rest of the way open with his pointed finger and strolled into the room, crunching the remaining vase shards under his shoeless feet. He sat down on the bed, sat with his feet crossed like a child, and winked before the emotionless look returned to his face. I couldn't take it anymore. Promise or not, this wasn't the story I'd wanted. Suddenly I was aware of a bulge of car keys in my left pocket and the mass of my wallet in my right. In what felt like one movement, I stood, yanked the door open, and tore down the hall, down the steps, out the front door, and into my car. I'd left my shoes, kicked off under the desk, but I didn't care. Couldn't even bring myself to look up to see if he was following me. I had put my car in reverse and backed out of the driveway as fast as I could. I nearly dropped the transmission out of the car, slamming it into drive. I made it to a hotel on the other side of town. I must have scared the receptionist half to death with my bloody feet and bloodshot eyes, but she gave me a room, so I didn't care. Inside, I shuffled to the bed, closed my eyes, and fell onto the sheets face first. Click. I squeezed my eyes shut, racing towards sleep. Squeak. I was almost there. I could feel reality falling and twisting away, but I wasn't fast enough. "All out of ideas," he crooned. I reluctantly opened my eyes to find his mere inches away from mine. On the day that my friend and I went searching for the Catawanga, I lay in a field of cotton-spun dandelions and roasted in the evil gleam of the sun. It was one of the dog days of summer, when all the shadows are golden and the days never end. It just runs languidly onward like a paint smear. The sky was pristine blue of a hydrangea flower, without a cloud in sight. Every so often, Elliot would leap up excitedly, claiming he could see a cloud forming, but it was always a plane or a trick of the light or a runaway dandelion waltzing through the air. Chris grabbed Elliot's ankle as he went to jump up again and shoved him back onto the grass. "There's no goddamn clouds." "Language?" Elliot looked mildly offended. Chris snorted. He was a football player through and through, with huge shoulders and a temper to match. so I quickly got up in the hopes of heading off a confrontation. "I'm bored. Let's go play catch or something." Chris started to agree, but paused. A dangerous light came into his eyes, and I was immediately afraid. According to Chris, his ideas were brilliant. According to literally anyone else, they were insane. Like the time he'd suspended the school weeb, Peter, from a tree branch to see if the squirrels would eat him. Peter had hung him there like an overweight flag for 6 hours. "Have you guys heard of the Catawanga?" He stared straight at Elliot as he said it. "I heard that it lurks in the old Fairground and eats bad kids who wander off. It's got the eyes of a snake, and it ties the bones of its victims into its fur. Little Willie's cousin saw it, and he said it has claws like... Chris fumbled for the right words. "Knives?" I suggested. "Yeah, like knives. There's no such thing. It's probably some animal." Elliot didn't sound very sure of himself, though. Of course, I knew about the Catawanga. Everybody in town knew about it. The stories were many and conflicting. In some, it was a great dragon who hoarded the skulls of children and only brought them out during rainy nights to admire them in the light of the moon. In others, the Catawanga was a great man-beast abandoned by his family, bitter and afraid of the world. But always, it lived in the abandoned fairground, and always, it was very, very hungry. In my town's heyday, people came from all over the world to see the famous Grenadine Circus, open all year round and fun for the whole family. But that was a long time ago. What I knew about the circus came from the old geezers clustered around the creaky folding tables, telling stories about their youth. Everyone knew that half those stories were made up, and the other half, well, they might as well be. But I had always been fascinated by the circus. Or rather, I was fascinated by the way all the adults treated it. The Catawanga was not regarded as one of the harmless legends for the little kids to tell when they were warm and safe around the campfire. To my parents, to the parents of all the other kids that I knew, the Catawanga was real, and the circus was to be avoided at all costs. "The Catawanga isn't real," Elliot said again, more firmly. "Probably everyone freaked out about a cougar or a tiger or a really hairy guy." "We don't get those around here," I hesitated. "Well, we do get hairy people, but I've never seen any predators bigger than that ugly babysitter of yours." The last remark was directed at Chris. "Right, everybody shut up. I'm going to the fairground, and y'all are chicken if you don't come." Under the dire threat of being called a chicken, Elliot and I followed Chris as he confidently strolled away. My town was given a name by the 20-somethings who lived there, the ones who were too old to be satisfied with the tiny lives they lived here, but too young to accept that big lives were meant for big kids born in big cities far away from people that believed in Catawangas. The 20-somethings called my town Satan's Soul because it was so small. My friends and I made it to the fairground in less than 10 minutes. Vines twined up the poles that held up a sign which proudly proclaimed Grenadine Circus. It was barely recognizable. It had decaying wooden things that might once have been stalls, ground covered in leaves that crunched at every step, and anthills. Lots and lots of anthills. Chris smacked his meaty palms together. "Let's go hunt us some Catawanga meat." Elliot rolled his eyes. We walked into the circus together, because when we actually got there, Chris didn't seem all that keen to go first. Elliot trailed his fingers over a row of half-submerged cages. I wonder where all the animals went when the circus shut down. There was a crashing sound to the side. Elliot and I looked over to see a half-exposed basement with a ladder leading down into it. Chris moaned at the bottom. I rushed up, sliding down the ladder, and grabbed at Chris. "Dude, are you all right?" He started crying, great sobbing gasps that gradually transformed into hysterical laughter. You should have seen your face." Chris stood up and dusted himself off, pleased at his prank. I sighed and turned to leave, but growls from the back of the room stopped me. "It's probably just the wind. It's just the wind," I said, doing my best to sound sure. But nails scraped along stone, undermining my words. "That's it. I'm out." Chris retreated up the ladder. "Chicken," Elliot yelled at his back. "The Catawanga isn't real." The growls got louder. "The Catawanga isn't real." Elliot's face was pale. "I'm not leaving. I'm not a chicken." I tried to pull Elliot away, but he stood his ground. "The Catawanga isn't real," Elliot screamed into the black of the room, as if he could wish the shadowy shape moving at the back of the room into non-existence. "The Catawanga isn't real, and we don't get predators here, and you aren't allowed to be real." He bellowed the words out as if some tiny, important thing was about to be broken, and that was the last thing he could ever say. I glanced at the shape. It was just a lump of shadows in the corner. I grabbed Elliot's arm and decided I didn't want to see it move. I talked to him calmly, projecting what I didn't feel. "Elliot, come on, let's go. It'll be okay, Elliot. We have to leave now." Growls bubbled up from behind me. "Elliot, move!" Elliot's face went pale. He pointed over my shoulder with one trembling finger. The bear was rather pathetic. It lunged for us, but only made it halfway, banging its nose against the ground and whimpering like a petulant child. The bear's fur was falling out in patches. Its eyes were covered with milky white film, and it sniffed the air, trying to find its dinner. All those years of being endlessly crammed onto bicycles and paraded around like an oversized dog, followed by years alone in the fairground, had taken their toll on the creature. Despite that, it was very big and very obviously hungry. "But we don't get bears here," I said stupidly. "I told you," Elliot whispered. "I asked what happened to the circus animals, and now we know. I told you so." I grabbed Elliot by the arm and pulled him out of the basement. As we scrambled up the ladder, I glanced back. The last thing I saw was the faded red collar around the bear's neck, the last remnant of the Grenadine circus. Elliot and I met Chris by the edge of the grounds and told him about the bear. I guess the Catawanga isn't real, just some dumb kids making up stories about a bear. He sounded disappointed, even though he had run away from the bear like he had bees in his pants. Yeah, I guess. I was relieved, though. Something moved in the trees. The wind died down suddenly, and I could just barely hear a scraping that sounded like long, long claws sliding across concrete. The sound got louder and louder, built until I could feel the vibrations in my chest. There was a figure inside the gate, large and bulbous, with limbs protruding at seemingly random angles. One of those limbs held a limp hunk of meat that still had a red collar around its neck. It didn't have a face, but something about the way it lounged there made it seem undeniably smug. Chris wasn't the only one who ran away that time. I never saw the Catawanga again, but as soon as I turned 18, I moved away with no plans and no money. Elliot left too, but Chris stayed. He'd always been stubborn like that. On my 20th birthday, he was found headless just outside the fairgrounds.